Hey, welcome back to part 2 of our series of the top millennial mental health issues. I'm Scott Treese with Life Sketch Counseling and Coaching, and today we're diving into something that really hits close home for so many of us, and that is stress-induced depression. Now, why this topic? And essentially it's because the World Health Organization just announced that depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Yeah, and let that sink in. Not heart disease, not chronic pain, not injury, depression. And as a clinician, I've really found that depression is sometimes the hardest cases to deal with. And, if I think of how depression works, is essentially all the stuff that we know that we're supposed to be doing, right? Like get enough sleep and go be social and eat healthy, exercise, get enough sunlight, right? Do our work. All the things that we know we should be doing, depression essentially just tells us not to, right? It's this giant weight that continues to pound and compound on us. The other thing is depression, it lingers, right? It's a lingerer. And it can last for weeks or months, but I think often even years. And again, no matter what we seem to do, or even when it feels like, hey, we're starting to come out of it, we can easily cycle right back in. And this is really frustrating for, I think friends and family of people who are suffering from depression, right? As they're just sort of helplessly watching this person seemingly needlessly suffer, right? And this is I think always the cliche advice that people give, right? It's just like, well, just think positive or get out of bed, right? Like these seemingly menial, simple tasks, but again, with the weight of depression kind of crushing on us, it makes it really, really difficult. And the other thing that I think, particularly as a provider, but also I can imagine as a parent or a loved one, is depression is also dangerous, right? It's uniquely dangerous because suicidal ideation is a key feature. And this is where chronic thoughts of around death, of committing suicide or killing oneself. And by the way, this is different than what's sometimes referred to as self-harm, right? That is injuring oneself, which is categorically different than killing oneself. And let me just pause and I think make sort of this note that if you're in a place, right, if you're suffering from depression and you're struggling with suicidal ideation and you need help, there's a few different resources. One, you can call 988 or 911. 988 is the crisis lifeline. 911 is typically your police, fire, that sort of thing. You can always go to a nearest emergency room as well. It's really important because sometimes when these suicidal thoughts get stuck into our head, it's really hard to get out of it. And I've literally talked with hundreds of people who have struggled with suicidal thoughts. And never once have I talked with someone who doesn't want to live at some level. And so I think it's really important to fight for that life. So again, if you need help, reach out, get connected to it as soon as you can. Let's cover some of the basics. And clinically speaking, there's going to be several types of depressive disorders. So there's major depressive disorder. There's persistent depressive disorder, sometimes or maybe historically called dysthymia. There's even depression tied to different life events like pregnancy, substance use, or even another mental health condition. But today we're focusing on major depressive disorder, what people refer to as just clinical depression. Essentially what this is that persistent sadness, right? A loss of interest or pleasure in things that we used to like. We're having fatigue, brain fog. There's a lot of guilt and self-worth issues. And again, that persistent thought of suicidal ideation for some people. And depression isn't just feeling sad. It's like your brain shutting down critical functions like motivation, reason, or joy, right? It's like, hey, self, do you want to get out of bed today? And no, self, I just want to lay in bed and ruminate on all the terrible things that have happening or could be. Okay, so now let's address the pharmacized elephant in the room. And this is really this whole chemical imbalance theory. And for decades, we've been told that depression is all about just a chemical imbalance, right? It's all just about serotonin levels. And while antidepressants like SSRIs really do actually help, the science says that depression is way more complicated than just a chemical or just a neurotransmitter. Talking from inflammation, gut health, genetics, lifestyle factors, right, such as unhealthy habits to a toxic work environment. Depression just isn't in your head. It's in your gut, your hormones, even to how much sunlight you're getting. And now what I want to introduce to you is looking at depression through what we're going to call a biopsychosocial model. Essentially, this is a much more complicated version of nature and nurture. And so I want you to imagine that your mental health is a glass. Like we're saying a glass of depression. The ice cubes in this glass really are representing as your predispositions, right? Think about this as being loaded towards this. We have our bio, the biology, these are our physical parts, the neurotransmitters, yes, but also our genetics, our gut biome, our hormones. Then there's the the psychology, our thinking patterns, even our personality traits, right? If I tend to be more sensitive to rejection or have more what traditionally was called neuroticism, which is emotional instability, our personality makeup. And then I even think of life events, right? Trauma, early childhood experiences. These elements also really shape and predispose us to depression. And then there's the social side of this. And so this is just from culture, as well as I think the biggest part of this is often around isolation and being socially disconnected from others, or even the stigma from even mentioning depression. I grew up in a culture, we called it cabin fever, which I now realize is just seasonal depressive disorder, or seasonal affective disorder, SAD, which is funny. This was something of like, hey, we don't go talk to mental health providers, right? It was maybe go talk with your pastor or your friends or something else, but right, we didn't actually call it depression. And so this is the biopsychosocial. And then if we pour in the liquid, and so what is that? Is that's essentially stress. So as life keeps pouring stress in, when the glass overflows, that's when depression manifests. And you're going to get those classic symptoms like you're feeling blah and tired and hopeless. And so millennials, our glasses are overflowing. Depression rates in our generation have skyrocketed by 47% since 2013. And this is before Trump and before COVID and before all these other things. I keep being curious as to why. And certainly we're going to break it down. But one thing I think is interesting is, typically the older you get, right, is in that late teens to young adults, you have a lot of depressive type symptoms or depression, clinical depression, and then we sort of move out of it as we age. That necessarily hasn't been the case for the millennials. So it's actually stuck with us a little bit. And so that's what we're going to explore throughout some of the rest of this video. The first stress that's pouring into our lives is economic stress. And did you know that we're the first generation that are economically worse off than our parents are by age 30 in the entire American history, right? We've had multiple recessions. Housing has been quite the bear to deal with. And I'm now starting to see that we're sandwiched between this super high cost of childcare. I don't know about you, but it's been insanely difficult for our family to even get stable childcare. And now we're moving into the stage of starting to deal with our parents' generations. And so the economics of our generation has really been kind of difficult and dark throughout our whole lives. And we're also the first generation that's really been raised with some of this addictive technology. We, yes, of course, went from dial-up internet and CDs to all of this being really in one device. And yes, of course, I think we could pick on social media from the FOMO that it induces. Certainly, I think that the toxic comparison, right? If I'm always seeing someone else who's richer and fitter and happier and healthier than I am, right? So there's that toxic comparison. But I think more than social media, and sometimes I think it gets too much of a bad rap, I'm going to blame, I think, the devices and screens. We know the blue light is certainly disrupting sleep, but it's also like uber highly stimulating, right? It's like, I was at a zoo, for example, and I was actually watching kids watch lions, and the lions were just laying on top of a rock, not really doing anything. And then there was a kid with an iPad who was basically watching like a lion attack a gazelle. And it's just so much more interesting than real life. And our brains are wired to really want to engage and stay engaged with that content, right? So now we're doom scrolling, forever connected onto these devices. And this is always, whether, stress doesn't have to just be negative, it's really just a stimulus. And so we're constantly plugged in, we're constantly getting inundated with really highly stimulated, often toxic content. And the last stressor, and I'm going to argue that this might be the most destructive, has really been around social isolation. And we'll cover social anxiety in another video, but our atomized culture, fueled by technology, has exploded us into a full-fledged loneliness epidemic, which literally kills us at the same rate as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. These stressors are keeping us in a chronic fight or flight mode, which activates cortisol, our stress hormone. And in the short term, this adaptive response really keeps us focused and ready to react. But the long term, however, remaining in this constant state of alert, therefore prolonged exposure to threat of cortisol, has really detrimental effects to our physical and mental health. Now let's map the path of depression. When the stress response becomes chronic, it leads to systemic inflammation, which are our body's natural response to injury, right? A sprained ankle, which becomes swollen and hot, or an illness, right? Which is when you get a fever during a flu. And this persistent low-level inflammation doesn't just harm the body, it has profound effects on the body, or on our brain, and therefore our mental health. Chronic inflammation damages tissues and organs, including the brain. And over time, this impairs cognitive function, really making it harder to think clearly and focus, or even make some good or healthy decisions. Inflammation in the brain also disrupts the balance of these neurotransmitters, which reduces the availability of key chemicals like serotonin, but also dopamine and neuroepinephrine, which plays a critical role in mood regulation and emotional stability. And then prolonged exposure to cortisol and inflammation really hinders what's called our neuroplasticity, which is our brain's ability to adapt, learn, and form new connections. This makes it harder to recover from stress and really adapt to new challenges. And then evidence shows that chronic stress could cause persistent emotional dysregulation, which makes individuals more prone to negative thinking and distorted beliefs about themselves and about the world. And these cognitive patterns can create a feedback loop, which really exacerbates stress and depression. In essence, chronic stress, through inflammatory effects, lays the groundwork for depression. This silent process doesn't just affect your mood, it reshapes your brain, your body, and your ability to cope, creating a perfect storm for mental and emotional health challenges. So, how to overcome depression? We're going to talk about getting to the root cause. Instead of just simply addressing some of the symptoms, which can often happen in traditional, medication management models like pharmacotherapy, we're going to look at taking a holistic approach that should also address the chronic stress and inflammation in this process. And first things first, before we cope with stress, we need to address the stressors. Think of emotions, especially your negative ones, as your body trying to communicate with you. Like a check engine light, depression is letting you know something is wrong, but you don't really know what it is, right? It's not a full diagnostic process. And let's say if you're living check to check and you're anxious about your economic viability, then you might need to make more money. If you're struggling with addiction, and you may have to pursue sobriety before you get to other life problems. If you're in a toxic relationship, you might have to develop more consistent personal boundaries. So first things first, listen to the stressors, pay attention, identify and address the problem. And so what can we do? Let's talk about some actionable steps to combat this chronic stress, inflammation, and the path to depression. We need a holistic approach that accompanies our biological, psychological, and social interventions. First of our biological interventions, where we're really focusing on the physical self. I like to start here with many of my clients just because this is the most tangible. This is the most concrete aspect of really combating depression. And because our bodies are incredibly resistant, but we need to give them the tools and the time to heal itself. And yes, of course, sometimes medication is essential, but we also can really start to affect our lifestyle, right? We can shift to a low inflammation diet in whole foods like clean meats, fruits, vegetables, omega-3 rich fish, nuts, and seeds, natural inflammation fighters, really that support both our brain and body health. Exercise is a really powerful tool for reducing stress. And I'm going to encourage explosive movements like sprinting, weightlifting, or high intensity interval training or HIIT. This can help reset your body's cortisol levels. And then last, I think sleep is our natural reset button. It balances our cortisol. It restores our neurotransmitters and is really going to start to improve some of that mental clarity. Establish your bedtime routine and try to aim for that 7 to 9 hours of sleep, really whatever's going to work best for you. And then our psychological effectors. This is where we're really talking about addressing our mind, not just our brain. And so our minds and emotions, these are deeply connected to our physical health. And these psychological strategies can help manage our stress and rebuild some of our mental strength. Practices like yoga, contemplative prayer, or mindfulness-based stress reduction can lower cortisol levels and improve emotional regulation. Even just a few minutes a day of focused breathing really can make a difference. And then talking to a professional, whether that's through traditional psychotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, career coaching or mentoring, this can help you identify and break down harmful thought patterns, set goals, and find a sense of purpose. And if you have faith, lean into it. Whether it's through attending church, participating in fellowship groups, or practicing spiritual disciplines like prayer and meditation. Nurturing your faith can really strengthen your emotional resilience and provide a foundation for healing. And then even practicing self-help, right? Like journaling, reading, or engaging in structured self-discovery can aid you in processing emotions and understanding yourself better. It's really about creating this space for reflection and growth. Let's talk about the third piece of the biopsychosocial model, social interventions, where we're emphasizing strengthening our social connections. Humans are social creatures, and the relationships that we build can either help us thrive or contribute to our stress. And social interventions focus on fostering healthy, supportive connections with others. So build strong, meaningful relationships with family, friends, and peers. These can provide emotional support and reduce feelings of isolation. Regular social interaction fosters a sense of belonging, and it's really going to boost our well-being, which helps protect against the negative effects of stress and depression. And so I think for many of people that I encounter where we're sort of saying like, hey, I don't have a big friend group or my family's really far away. This is where I think about joining groups or activities where you can interact with others, whether it's volunteering, attending church, or participating in fitness classes. Being part of a community fosters belonging and reduces isolation. And we really need that human stimulus. And so that's why we want to go be out into the world, but we also need to unplug to recharge. So limit your screen time and embrace moments of silence and solitude, right? Embrace boredom and use that time to reflect, to read, or simply just enjoy being in the present. By addressing stress from these biopsychosocial angles, we can break the cycle of chronic stress, inflammation, and depression cycles. Healing is a process, but with the right tools and support, we can rebuild our resilience, restore balance, and lead healthier, more fulfilling lives. If this video resonates with you, share it with someone who might need it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more real talk about mental health. Remember, depression may linger, but so can hope, and that's what we're here to nurture. Thanks, guys. Catch you next time.